Hi, good afternoon. I'm Jeremy Love, immigration attorney and the founder of the Love Law Firm here in Hoover, Alabama. It's a pretty sunny and warm day. I wanted to say thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. If you don't know me, I've been practicing immigration law exclusively for over 7 years now, and I have worked previously with the Hispanic Interest Coalition of Alabama, had my own firm here in Hoover, specializing in immigration law for the last 5 years. And I try to reach out in the community a good bit and travel around and do workshops, as well as a lot of know your rights type information, talk a lot about immigration. Right now, I'm going to talk about what's been going on with the Trump administration and increased enforcement operations by ICE, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement. En este momento voy a hablar inglés y en como 20 minutos voy a empezar en español también. Right now I'm going to talk in English and I'll be back in about 20 minutes for the version in Spanish. So as we've seen, there's been a lot of increased activity by ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, in the state of Alabama. We know that over the weekend there was a raid at some apartments in Madison, Alabama, up in northern Alabama. I have a lot of clients in northern Alabama, and I do consultations in that area. So it's something I've certainly taken to heart. And I know several people who've been affected by that, and I've heard some other reports of some raids in other areas as well in Alabama, and that's something that I wanted to address today, about a little bit about what's going on, as well as what people can do to know their rights, to be informed, and to protect yourselves and also your family members as well. So thank you again for joining me. First of all, I want to start with covering a little bit about what has been going on generally with the Trump administration as it relates to increased ICE efforts. I covered this a little bit before in a prior consultation or prior chat, but there has been a number of executive actions that have been announced by the Trump administration since January. One of the more famous ones is the travel ban involving several Muslim countries, primarily Muslim countries, and so that's something that has had lawsuits filed against it multiple times, so it's something that's not in effect currently, but it only affected people from those certain countries. The most recent travel ban did not affect anybody with permanent residence, for example, and that was something that was an issue previously. But again, just to remind you that is currently been enjoined in court, which means it's not being enforced at this time. Although we have seen increased scrutiny, I guess that's part of extreme vetting, if you will, that Trump mentioned as immigrants are coming to enter the U.S. So that's something that to know it's taking a little bit longer to get through security right now, and so something to be aware of. Another thing that we've seen a lot is what's called 287G. That's from the Immigration Nationality Act. It's basically agreements that ICE has in effect with local law enforcement to enforce immigration laws. That's something that has been around for a while, that's been debated and talked about a good bit. In my opinion, it's something that's dangerous because it erodes the trust that immigrants have with our local law enforcement. And we've already seen several articles showing that victims of crime have been less likely to report crimes when they've been victims. So that makes our communities less safe, in my opinion. But 287G is something that Trump talked about, trying to get local law enforcement to enforce immigration laws, to basically have police officers act as ICE agents until ICE can show up. So that's something that's still being debated. We've had several mayors locally, as well as governors in other states, mayors in other cities, who've said that they are not going to act as ICE agents. Trump administration said they're going to take funding away from those cities and states. Recently spoke with the police chief in Tuscaloosa, who said he's not going to enforce immigration laws there. It's something that police officers don't want to do because they don't have the training, the staffing, or really don't want to open themselves up to liability to act as ICE agents. So that's another thing. Another thing going on has been basically the ramping up of hiring ICE and CBP, that's Customs and Border Patrol, or Border Protection technically, agents. So that's Trump said he's going to hire 10,000 more ICE agents to do deportations, as well as 5,000 more officers at the border, CBP officers. The issue with that I've said is, yes, you can increase the deportation force that you have, but most of these cases still go through immigration court, and it requires hiring more judges. And as you see right now, the backlog in immigration court is in some cases several years, depending on the case, because there just aren't enough judges to handle all the immigration cases that are currently in removal proceedings. So in order to try to combat that a little bit, the Trump administration said they're going to do more expedited removal cases for people who've been in the U.S. for less than 2 years. Previously, that was just people who were stopped at the border, but now they've expanded that to people who've been in the U.S. for less than 2 years. So that's one other thing I wanted to mention. If anyone has any questions as I'm going along, feel free to let me know. You can talk right here in the chat. Again, my name is Jeremy Love, immigration attorney here in Hoover, Alabama. Just want to say, just to cover a little bit of good news. As of right now, DACA, that's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, is still in effect. People can still file for DACA for the first time, as well as file DACA renewal applications for someone who's already been approved for DACA. So that's a good bit of good news that's going on. So that's a little recap on what's been going on as far as the executive actions are concerned, as well some of the actions that have been happening locally here in Alabama. Want to say that it's important for everyone to, if you have an option with immigration, to go ahead and pursue that option. If you're married to a U.S. citizen, if you're eligible for DACA or for U visa, which is for victims of crime, I highly recommend starting that process now. It is something that will help you long term, but also in the short term. If you have an application pending with USCIS, that's something you could show to a police officer or an immigration officer if you are stopped and have a case that's currently pending. That's something that I highly recommend. Anyone who's a permanent resident, I would recommend filing for naturalization because someone who is a naturalized citizen cannot be deported. So that's something helpful to know. Also, if you're a U.S. citizen, it's easier to come in and out of the U.S. than it is as a permanent resident. Because if you're a permanent resident, every time you come into the U.S., you have to request permission to enter. So that's something that's important to remember as well. So another thing I recommend is having an emergency plan, which should include, first of all, knowing your rights, having a plan in place for your children or your property if you're detained. That would be a power of attorney. That's something that I highly recommend doing. There's a lot of things you can do with a power of attorney. It's important that you hire someone who's qualified to handle that. Now, it's important, a power of attorney is not custody. That's a different process. If you're looking to do custody, that's something that needs to be done by a family attorney. So that's something I recommend. Also, if you have any prior criminal issues that haven't been resolved, I'd recommend talking to a criminal defense attorney who can handle you with that. So remember that if you're a licensed attorney, you can handle different types of legal matters, but it doesn't mean that you know anything about that. I could handle a custody case if I wanted to, but I don't really know much about custody. I focus on immigration, so I would refer you to an attorney who handles custody. But if you need help with immigration matters, powers of attorney or other things along those lines, let me know. I'd be happy to help out with immigration. So a couple things to know. I mentioned know your rights a little bit. So I want to know that you have rights when it comes to being in your home. This is very important, and this is something we don't know all the details about what happened with ICE in Madison, but we do know that the ICE did not have warrants to arrest people or to enter the homes where they were. So one of two things happened. Either they violated the people in the home's constitutional rights, or the people in the home allowed ICE to enter. and anyone who lives there can do that. So it's really important to know if ICE or police are knocking on your door, you do not have to open the door. You could tell them through the door that you're not opening it unless they have a warrant to enter your home or arrest the people who are there. And the warrant has to be signed by a judge. That's important to know as well. So you can tell them, I'm not opening the door. You can pass under the door, and then you can look at it that way, and you can review it and make sure it's signed. Also, if they do have an order, an arrest warrant for a particular person, that person can step outside the house and close the door behind them. No one else, and ICE does not have to ask about anyone else's paperwork. They can step out, close the door behind them, and anyone else can stay inside and remain silent and not have to answer anything. That's an important thing to know in your home. Everybody, does not matter immigration status, has the right to remain silent. Everyone has the right to speak to an attorney before being interrogated. So that's important to know too. You can say you would like to remain silent until you can speak to an attorney. Everyone has that right. So that's very important to know. If someone stopped, when they're outside the home, first of all, it's important to know that you cannot be stopped by a police officer just because they think you're not documented. That's something that one of the provisions of HB 56 that was thrown out was that police cannot just stop you for suspecting that you're an immigrant, or an undocumented immigrant. That's not something that's valid. But during the course of a reasonable stop or a lawful stop, that means that they had reasonable suspicion to stop you, then they can request immigration papers. That doesn't mean you have to provide them or answer any questions. Remember, you have the right to remain silent. But if someone stops your car for speeding, for example, they can ask you for license and registration, and they can also proof of insurance. And while they stop you, if you show them a foreign passport or an international driver's license, then they can ask about your status in the U.S. Usually they just write you a ticket and then you leave, but still, sometimes they can start asking about your immigration status. They're not required to, but they can, and that's when it's really important not to answer any questions if you're undocumented. If you have a pending case, maybe you can show, hi, I have a pending application for permanent residence, so you can show that. But other than that, I would remain silent when anyone's asking questions about your immigration status. I believe I have a question about that. So, as I mentioned, ICE cannot simply just, ICE actually can ask about immigration status, but they have to have, just the police, they have to have a reasonable suspicion to stop you. So you can keep going. You can ask if you're being detained for a particular reason, and if you are, then say you have the right to an attorney. If they say you're not being detained, then you can ask, do I have the right to leave? And then you can leave. So that's important to know what the situation is. I have a general question. I'll get to that in a minute about family petition. So I'll cover that in just a moment. But right now I'll continue with rights. So also it's important that people have rights in the workplace as well. It's important that if ICE does a workplace raid, that you don't panic and run. Again, you have the right to remain silent, the right to request speaking with an attorney. I'll recommend hiring an experienced immigration attorney to handle your case if it's an immigration matter. And not all immigration attorneys handle all types of cases. So that's important to know too, that the attorney you hire has experience in the type of case that you have. That's also important. So the question that I got, I'll cover that right now, was a U.S. citizen filed for their spouse and wanted to know if they should continue with the application. That depends. Remember, a president cannot change immigration law. That only Congress can do that. So in general, a president cannot change the process to become a permanent resident. So if, let's say, take a case where someone's married a U.S. citizen and they entered with a visa, then they can do the whole process here generally, unless it's a criminal issue, and they could adjust and become a permanent resident here in the U.S. Well, if the spouse, let's say instead, the spouse entered without a visa, then generally you're going to have to do a waiver. There's some exceptions to that, but if you're married to a U.S. citizen, you came in without a visa, generally you have to do a waiver, and that often requires, or usually requires, an interview and a medical exam, as well as fingerprints in their country of origin. So you do have to go back. Now you can file a provisional waiver before you leave if the issue is just the unlawful entry and not a criminal issue and not a second entry, because if there are multiple entries sometimes or prior deportation, it's possible you're not eligible to continue with that case. So that's important to know too. It depends on the case. But you can file in those kind of cases if there aren't any criminal issues or prior deportations or multiple entries. You can file a provisional waiver and know if the waiver is going to be approved before the interview. Do not leave before that waiver is approved. And you go down to the interview at the consulate from whatever country your spouse or where you are from, and then you can come back. And when you come back, you're a permanent resident. So, and since 2013, that can be done provisionally if you're married to or the child of a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. So that's important to know. But we can talk about petitions and waivers for a long time. That's something I have a lot of experience with. So feel free to reach out to me directly. Our phone number here is 205-323-8727. A lot of information on our website, jlovelaw.com as well. Feel free to reach out to us. I'm happy to help out. So that's all that I have for today. Unless I have more questions, I'll be right back in a few minutes in Spanish. Voy a regresar un momento en español también. Yeah, I hope I was able to answer that question about the petition. I would recommend continuing with the process as long as it's something you're eligible for. It's important to talk to experienced immigration attorney about your specific case, because a small detail can throw everything off. But yes, usually there's not a lot that Trump can do to change the process to become permanent resident. So I want to say thank you again for joining me. Feel free. I try to do these chats about once a month, updates, especially if we have any news. And I know there are a lot of Know Your Rights workshops by ACIJ and other organizations. I recommend going to those. I'll try to participate in more of those in the future. And remember to keep the faith. There's a lot of people out there fighting for immigrant rights. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are more lawsuits filed to try to stop some of these executive actions and to try to protect our immigrant community. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a great day.